Let's create a tabbing system just like we have here on the Stack Exchange site, where we've got some tabs here on the left-hand side, and clicking them opens up different sections. There's a couple of different ways we can go about this. One is to use custom states, which we briefly covered in a previous video, and the other is to use URL parameters. Now I've got a demo page set up, which is going to be used to contrast the two approaches. And what's going to happen is, we want to have a red button, which is going to show a red shape. I've got that hidden here on the page, and a blue button showing a blue shape. So all I've got right now set up are these elements, and these shapes are set to be invisible on page load. So, the simplest way that we can set up this functionality is to literally just have an action. When the button is clicked, then we show the corresponding shape, right? So when the button red is clicked, we show the red shape. When the button blue is clicked, we show the blue shape. Okay, we click the red button, there is the red shape. Click the blue button, there's the blue shape. Now, obviously there's a major limitation here, which is that, we only want one of these shapes to appear at one time. And at the moment, clicking the blue shape doesn't hide the red shape. So, perhaps the simplest way would then just be to have a hide action, after we show the blue shape, hide the red shape, and have a corresponding action when the red button is clicked. But this is getting a little bit tedious. You can imagine that maybe we want to have other elements on the page which are also have to be shown and hidden. And that means that every time that there's an element that's going to appear in some cases and be hidden in the others, that requires two actions, one to show it, one to hide it. And we can't also have behavior like highlighting this red button whenever the red shape is being shown. That's not something that we can do here within the workflow tabs. So a much better approach would be to use a custom state. Now, a custom state is nothing more than a container for data. So just like I have a group, right? And that has a type of content, and then I can set that content to be whatever I want. A custom state is no different than that. It just lives in a kind of a different place. Each element can have an unlimited amount of custom states, and they sort of exist as metadata. They're extra containers attached to the main element. So you set them here by clicking this eye icon, and then you can add a new custom state. And you do the same thing as you would do when setting the data source of a group. You say what the name of the state is going to be, right? And then you set the type of data that it is expecting. Now, in our case, we're not going to create it here in this silly little group. We're actually going to create our custom state on the page. The advantage of doing that on the page is that it keeps all of your custom states in one place. You can just have a list of all of the states that you have, and you don't have to go digging around in the elements tree and thinking, oh, what element did I create that state on? You just keep them all on the page. So we'll create a new state called color. It'll be of type text, and this will be our reference data for these shapes to know whether or not they should appear. So we can have a condition here on the shape that says something like when the current page's state color, right? This is the state we just created, is red, then this element is visible. And we'll have a corresponding expression. I'll just copy this by right-clicking and pasting that on the shape blue, and then just changing here the value to blue and have this element is visible. So that's sort of the response to whatever the state is. We also, of course, need some way to set that state. So when we click on these buttons, now instead of having this show red, what we'll do is we'll set the value of the state. So we'll come down to element actions, set state. Okay, we'll find the element where the state is living. In our case, that's the page. And then we'll set the value of the state to be whatever we want. So in our case, we're clicking the button red. So let's set it to be red. and I will right click, copy this action, paste that over here and call this blue, and then delete this. Okay, now if I refresh the page, if I click red, then the red shape appears. If I click blue, the blue shape appears. And that's because we are setting that custom state to be the same value that the shape is looking for when deciding whether or not to show itself. Now, I want to use this opportunity to highlight a little limitation of the way I've set things up currently. Let's say, for example, when I'm setting the state for the blue shape, I accidentally, without really thinking, set this to be blue with a capital B. Okay, the red one is appearing okay, but the blue one here, I just click the blue button and now this won't appear. So I can go down into my debugger to figure out what's going on. If I click this inspect tab, I want to find my blue shape and figure out, well, why is it not appearing? So I'm looking at that condition, which is evaluating to false, and looks like the shape is looking for a blue with a lowercase b, but the color state actually has a value of blue with a capital B. So this is an example of repeating yourself. I have put in here a literal text value when I'm setting the state, but then when I'm looking at the state to figure out how the shape should appear, I have another literal value. So that one literal text value here and another one here. Now, this is not a good way of setting things up. You want to adhere to a programming principle called don't repeat yourself, otherwise known as dry. And that means that what we should really be doing is storing this value, this literal text value, in one place, and then having everything that is reliant on that text value or referencing that text value, looking at where that text value is actually stored. So pulling it out dynamically. So just to show you what I mean, I'll put this button blue in a group, okay, and just drag the bottom of that group down so you can see it, okay, call it group blue. And I want to set this to be of type text, and the data source I will set to be blue. Now this is going to be our reference for that value. Now, when I'm here on this shape blue, instead of looking at a literal text value, which we've just seen is subject to problems, what I'll do is I'll look at group blue's text. So I'm pulling that in dynamically. And then when I'm actually setting the state of the page, instead of this literal text value, I'll replace that and I will instead look at the value of the text inside of group blue. So now I have those two areas which were previously setting and referencing individual values. They're both now pointing and looking at the same value, which is now residing somewhere else. So now if I see if this blue behavior will work, indeed it does. So I could do the same thing on the red shape. Okay, so I've set that up on the red shape as well. I can get a little bit more fancy, and instead of having this literal text as the display text for the button, I can now just take the parent group's text and capitalize it. Same thing here on blue. Okay, so here's the behavior that we've set up. Now, there are a couple of limitations with this approach. The first one is that now, if I click on blue, I click on red, I click back to blue. Now, a lot of users intuitively will want to click on their back button and be taken to the last tab that they were on. So if I just went from red to blue, if I'm clicking back, they would expect to now see the red shape. In fact, they're being taken to another page entirely. So that's not a great outcome for this system. The other limitation is that let's say that we want to navigate to this page from another page and automatically show the blue tab. If I navigate from a separate page, I'll just add a single button. Just go to blue shape. Okay, I can navigate to the page, but there isn't really any way for me to tell the page that, when I arrive, show me the blue shape. I might be able to hack something together with sending some data to the page, but it's a little bit messy and there is a better way. That better way is URL parameters. So what is a URL parameter? A URL parameter is anything that exists here in the URL after this question mark, and they exist as a name value pair. So each one will have a name. This, we could make this the color, just like the state that we just had. This is the name of that container, and this is the value in that container. For example, blue, right? That would be a valid URL parameter here. And if we had more, right? And debug mode equals true, we can have more than one parameter, but we just have to separate them with an AND symbol. So that's going into a little bit of the syntax, but let's stick with how to use parameters. So at the moment, we've got a parameter here, right? That is the same thing as setting the state of the page to be blue. What we could do is now have that blue shape look to the URL, look for this parameter, and then see, well, what's the value? And depending on the value, it can show itself or not. So if we go back to the page, we have the shape blue. Instead of this expression here, which I'll just clear, what we can do is come down and get data from page URL. And by clicking that, it opens up this extra little menu here where I can type in the value that I'm looking for, the parameter name. And now I just have a simple evaluate expression. Is it group blues text, right? Is it equal to blue? And if it is, then show this element. And now this is appearing. And I could do the same thing for the red shape. If I copy this, paste this over the top, change this to be group reds text. Okay, I want to now type in color equals blue. Okay, that works fine. What about color equals red? And now the red appears. So I can, cycle between these two to have different behavior on my app. So that's how the elements are looking at that reference data, that URL data. How do we set it? If I remove this action, you'll see that I can actually just navigate to the page, the same page that we're on, and click down here, send more parameters to the page. And every parameter that we add here, okay, remember it's a name value pair or a key value pair. Every parameter that I add here is going to appear after this question mark in the URL, right? So I could set the color to be, which button are we looking at here? The red one. Okay, so I'll set the color to be group reds text, and I'll right click, copy this and paste it onto the blue buttons workflow and set that to be group blues text. Okay, and now if I click cut group red, Lord and behold, it changes in the URL and vice versa. And the beauty of this is that you see I'm going from red to blue, okay? If I now use the browser's back button, I'm cycling through the parameters that I had set before. I'm cycling through those URLs, and so the behavior is being manifested here on the page. The other advantage, if I go back to our button page, is that now I can just set the same action. It doesn't even matter that I'm on a different page. I can go to that demo page I've got set up, send more parameters to the page, and let's say that we want to show the blue shape. Okay, well now I can go to our demo page. I can send in the URL this color parameter set to the value blue. And now once I arrive on the page, it's already set in the URL and the corresponding elements are reflective of that value. Now you might have noticed one digression I had from our do not repeat yourself principle. Okay, and that was that on my two shapes here, I've got a get color from page URL, and I'm looking for in the red shape the parameter name color, but I'm also looking for in the blue shape the parameter name color. Now if this for whatever reason was to change, if one day I decided that I was going to change this to tab, then I have to update this in every place in the app, every place that's looking towards the URL. So this is again me repeating myself. Much better would be to actually save the value of the parameter somewhere else on the page. So I can have a hidden group, right? Which we can just use as a container for the value in the URL. And all this is going to do is this exact same expression, get tab from page URL. I'm going to look for the color, right? So now this is going to evaluate to looking for the value corresponding to color in the URL. And now we point our shapes at this single group rather than them both looking individually to the URL with their literal parameter name fields typed in here. They'll both be looking dynamically at this group. So I can get rid of this altogether and simply say when the variable colors text is equal to group reds text, then this element is visible, and have the corresponding expression on our blue shape. Okay, so I click blue. I'm going to set the URL parameter to be blue, and this is still appearing just like it should because our variable color is now the one that's actually looking from the URL. So it's sort of an intermediary link between the URL and the rest of the elements that are going to be responding to this URL parameter. Okay, so that's a quick demonstration of how URL parameters work. Let's actually implement this now on our index page in building a simple tab system. So I'll just clear some room for us to add our tabs down the left-hand side. Okay, I'll add a new group, which is going to be where our tabs are going to live. Group tabs, and just create a simple template for each one. So we'll use a group as our button in this case. So this is going to be tab 1, all questions. Okay, when this tab is clicked, then we're just going to have the same behavior as we have right now. I'm going to give it a type of content of text and actually type in here what the value is going to be, just like we did on our demo page, and then have some text on the front, which is going to pull through that parent group's text and capitalize it. Center that vertically. Okay, and now I'll just control drag to create a copy of him. And this one is going to be tab 2, my questions. So in this case, we only want to show questions that were created by the current user. And now we can set up the actions on these groups. So when all questions is clicked, when that tab is clicked, then we're going to go to the page, the same page that we're on, and we're going to send through as the tab parameter this group's text, okay? And the same thing on our other tab. So I'll just copy this in its entirety and then change the element which is clicked to set this behavior. So if I preview that, right, I've got all questions, that's been set up there, and you can see that it looks a little bit funny. It's got this percentage sign and then a 20 after it. Now, some characters, including spaces, are just not allowed to be in URLs. If you add them in, then you're going to have some problems. In some browsers like Chrome, luckily for us, it's actually going to replace, if I add a space, it's going to replace that unaccepted character of a space with a percentage sign 20. And that's essentially the code for a space. This space or this whole URL is now URL encoded. That means that all of the unacceptable characters have been turned into their representation within the URL format. So that's why it's appearing as such. If I click my questions, we can see that the tab is reflecting as it should. So now we just have to make this repeating group reflect this behavior. Rather than creating a whole new repeating group just to hold the questions created by the current user, we'll just use the same repeating group and we'll double up. So remember, we won't just go straight here into the conditional tab and say, when get data from URLs parameter, the tab is equal to, you know where I'm going with this. We want to be storing the value of the tab URL parameter in another group on the page. Okay, so we could put that group literally anywhere, but a good practice is actually to put them in a pop-up. So this pop-up can just be essentially a parent container for all of our variables. We never have to show this pop-up to any users. The user won't even know that it exists. It's just a convenient way of storing all of the variables that we have on our page so that we can access them when we're programming. So I'll set this to be the variable tab. It's going to be a type text, and the data source, as we know, is going to be retrieving the tab parameter from the URL. And now this repeating group can just point at that variable, right? There's a variable tab. When that text is equal to, okay, the value of this tab to my questions, now we can just change the data source. So we can have the same search, but this time we're going to have a constraint, and that constraint predictably is going to be whether the created by field for that question is equal to the currently logged in user. So let's go and see if that works. I am logged in as a user. So we're currently on all questions. If I click my questions, you can see that we're now looking at only 4 questions instead of 5. So that seems to be working just like it should. Okay, we've got one more tab to add here, okay, which is the equivalent of this tags group down here, which is just going to be an overview, a repeating group of all of the tags that exist, and then we'll just do a simple count of all of the questions belonging to that tag. So I'll create another group down here, which we'll call tab 3 tags. Now when this is clicked, of course we need to set this to be tags. When this group is clicked, now we want to add another action, going to that same page and setting the tab to be the parent group's data. Now we want, obviously, when tags is clicked, for this whole repeating group to disappear and for our tags group to appear in its place. So how do we do that? Well, maybe we just drag our tags group right over the top of our repeating group. And we set the repeating group to be hidden whenever the tab is not reflective of my questions or all questions. Okay, but this is not a very good way of building in Bubble. The reason being, having elements stacked on top of one another is not only messy in the design tab, it's not only difficult to keep track of, but can also lead to some responsive issues. You've really got to fine tune all of the spacing between your elements. So a better way to do this, a better practice, is actually to stack groups on top of one another. Okay, so our group tags is actually going to exist here underneath our repeating group. Okay, this is our group tags. Okay, and I'll just add a little text so that we can identify it, because at the moment it's just an empty group. Okay, and we can have some condition here that says, all right, when our variable tabs text is equal to that tab3 tags. Remember, this is where the value tags is actually living. Okay, so when this value is equal to the URL's value, then we will show this element. And on the repeating group itself, okay, we can have sort of the inverse condition. It says when variable tabs text is equal to all questions text, or, okay, because we're using this repeating group for both the all questions, but also for my questions. Okay, then this element is visible. But if not, right, the default behavior can be to set it to be invisible. So let's see if that works. Okay, we've got our tags tab active and we can see tags down here, but we've got this empty space up here and we actually want tags to be appearing up here in the space where the repeating group was. And also this tags group is actually still visible on page load as well. How do we go about fixing that? Well, unfortunately, repeating groups aren't able to collapse when they're hidden. Groups, normal groups are. They expose this option, collapse this element's height when hidden. So that means that if this repeating group was in a group, right, and that group was collapsed, well then that group would just collapse down to nothing and this tags group would jump up into its place. So predictably, we need to put this repeating group inside of a group. Okay, so we'll call this group tab 1 and 2 just for simplicity. And let's find it in the elements tree by right-clicking on the repeating group and going reveal an elements tree. Now we can find that parent, but we can also now easily copy this expression, which was previously showing the repeating group only when the relevant tab was being shown, and actually add this now to our group tabs. And we have to remember our repeating group is still set to be invisible on page load. We don't want that. We want it to be visible, and we just want to use this parent group for our show hide conditionality. So it shouldn't be visible on page load. It definitely needs to collapse when it's hidden, and then it needs to be visible whenever either of these conditions is true. So let's see if that helps. Okay, we've got all questions, my questions, tags. So we still have the same problem, and we can actually try and figure out what's going on here, why this tags isn't jumping up. By clicking on this show responsive boxes, that kind of gives us some indication of what's going on. And we've got a group M there, right? That's, I think, the old group that we created before, so I can delete that. See, maybe does that make a difference? We're still down here. If I show the responsive boxes, there's nothing in there, okay? Indeed, this group tab in 1 has collapsed. It's not visible. It's invisible right now. So then what's causing this tags group to still be pushed down the bottom? Well, the culprit is actually this tabs group on the side. See, Bubble is treating this tabs group and the group here on the right-hand side as sort of one horizontal block. This is another horizontal block down here, but because this tabs group is still above this because the tabs group is still above the tags group, okay, following me, the tags group is being pushed down the page still. The height of this tabs group is maintaining the vertical spacing rules. So this tags group can't go up while this tabs group is still the height that it is. What we actually want is for this tabs group to be sort of its own vertical block, and then for this to be another vertical block, i.e., we've just got one horizontal group here, which is the group tab in 1, and then we've got another one down below, which is the tags group. So if this one disappears, this one jumps up. Now, the way to fix this is actually very simple. We just have to make sure that the left-hand group here, our tabs group, actually extends below or into the territory of this tags group. And I'm actually going to drag the tags group up because we've got a little bit of dead space there. So it needs to extend into the territory of this tags group. And that sort of does the job of splitting this page in two, where here is one vertical column and here is another vertical column. And so the collapsing rules are exclusive to the particular column. So let's see, if I now refresh the page, our tags group is still below, and the problem there is that it actually is jumping outside of group main. So I need to pull it back in. And if I now drag it across, okay, and refresh, now our tags group is appearing just like it should in the place of the questions repeating group. Okay, so that's the basic functionality there of the tabs system is present. We can do a little bit of fine tuning here. Okay, we can delete this and instead use this big text here as the indicator of what section we're currently viewing. So we can set that to be the variable tabs text and capitalize that. We can also have a condition on this text so that, when we're on a certain tab, that text kind of jumps out at us. We can see at a glance where we're at. So we can set a condition here that says when the parent group's text is equal to the variable tabs text, i.e. the parameter tab in the URL, then let's make the text bold. And we'll apply that to all of these texts. And now we have a bit of a nicer UI. Oh, we're not working there on my questions. That's because we forgot to click bold. And now on the tags group itself, we can actually add some content. So I'll add a repeating group here. And this repeating group of tags is going to have a data source equivalent to the tag type of content, where we're looking for, because these are option sets, all of the tags, and we'll do extended vertical scrolling. 4 rows is okay, but let's make it 3 columns. Actually, let's make it 2 columns just to give us a bit more room. And then in each of these, we're going to show 1, the current sales tags text or display. And then also, we'll also show how many questions are associated with this tag. So for that, we'll have to do a search for all of the questions where the list of tags on that question contains the current sales tag. And then we can do a count up of all of those questions. And I'll just center both of those vertically. Okay, so we've got a little tags group there. Obviously it needs a little bit of work. The responsiveness isn't looking too nice right now, but you get the basic idea. There's one last change that we need to make to this page. If we just preview it from scratch, you'll actually see that there's nothing being loaded here, but also there's nothing up here in the URL either. It only appears once I actually click on one of these tabs. So we need some way to account for a situation in which the page is loaded without any parameters in it. Hopefully you can guess that we can handle this by a workflow, a very powerful event trigger called page is loaded will be where we'll anchor our actions to. So when the page is loaded, and we only really want this to fire when there are no URL parameters in the URL, then we can say only when, and remember we've got that variable tab, okay, which is going to be holding the text from the URL. So we can rely on that. When that text is empty, okay, only then do I want you to navigate to the page again, but this time send some parameters, i.e. send the parameter of tab 1 all questions. Essentially telling the page to refresh, but this time have some parameter in the URL. So if I refresh this now voila, we have some behavior. If I take everything out of this URL and refresh it, then now everything is appearing just like it should. The page is refreshing because that tab is, that variable tab is empty. This is really the way to create a tabbing system, is using URL parameters. URL parameters is the way to go when you're doing any kind of navigation within a single page, when there's some groups or elements that are going to be visible some of the time and other groups or elements that aren't going to be visible, at other times. Well, using URL parameters over custom states just gives you a few more options. It makes it a flexible setup that you can add to easily later, and especially connect other pages into that navigation system.